Welcome everyone. My name is Bruce MacArthur and I'll be moderating this session on building an industry on open data. It's my pleasure to be here to introduce our speakers today. We all know that open data is the next wave. There are some challenges that entrepreneurs face. I'm sure you'll hear some of them, but there are also a huge number of opportunities related to the use of open data and open systems. And so on that note, we'll just get right into it because we're running a few minutes behind. I'd like to introduce Terry Gannon, founder and president of Intellog. Terry's worked for a number of oil and gas companies over the years, and his work recently is in the area of web-based tools to increase productivity, and he's been working on a range of applications for the oil and gas sector using open data, open source systems, and it's my pleasure to introduce Terry.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I appreciate that. And what's more, I appreciate your time, folks, and taking time to come and visit today and listen to my song and dance. The title of my presentation today is Open Data for the Oil and Gas Industry, and subtitled a cautionary tale, as you will see as it unfolds here in the next few minutes. I'm an entrepreneur. Intellog is a for-profit company. We try and make money using open source data and applications. And every entrepreneurial venture starts with the identification of a problem. And what I'm going to have to do to help you understand what the problems we're trying to solve is a very quick introduction to the oil and gas industry if you're not already familiar with it. This will be very brief. I think the simplistic view of what constitutes the industry is something like that. A drilling rig on the open prairie, drilling a hole straight down, and hopefully have oil and gas come gushing out and the money will follow. The reality is when you actually look below the surface, it's more like that. It's not vertical, it's not just one, and in some cases the wells will actually turn sideways and run out for a number of kilometers, and this is actually fairly typical today. If you want to minimize surface impact and maximize recovery, then your new oil well will look more like this than it will that sort of traditional standard vertical oil well. That's the first dimension of the problem, and that is that oil wells are complex animals these days, and you have to be able to identify individual portions of each well. And in some cases, each leg will be owned by a separate company. So you'll have multiple companies essentially working from the same surface location to different producing zones. The second dimension to the problem is that each operation on a well is a blizzard of documentation. I've just chosen to use a couple of documents to help illustrate how that process actually works. And I've identified two stakeholders, the producer, the oil and gas company, and the service company that's providing a service, and the exchange of just two documents. A quote going one way to the producer and then some sort of AFE or PO coming back. Now if you look a little bit more closely at how those documents are identified, the service company provides one method of identifying the well, and the producer provides a slightly different definition of the well. Now, as human beings, we can look at those two definitions and say, yeah, that's probably the same well, right? But from a digital perspective, they're as different as chalk and cheese. They don't compare at all. So if we have two parties using two slightly different versions of the identifier, they can no longer match the documentation. What that creates is basically a manual process where each document has to be opened manually, probably inspected by a human being, to see what well we're actually talking about. So it's very labor intensive. So the opportunity, as we see it, is to basically assign a UPC code, or in effect what's a UPC code, to each individual segment of each individual well. And the UPC code is essentially just nothing more than a standardized number that's assigned to a product. We propose exactly the same thing, or have proposed exactly the same thing. Our UPC code is going to be a little bit more sophisticated. We're going to use something called a universally unique identifier. This is a very unique number. It's unique to 10 to the 38th power. So in this room, we can all generate a couple of million of them while we're sitting here today, and statistically there is no chance of there being any overlap between the two. So we have proposed to assign a universally unique identifier to each individual well, and then allow the participating parties to assign their own familiar identifier to it. So if one company wants to use that kind of identifier, they can go ahead and do that. If the second company wants to use a slightly different identifier, they're more than welcome to do that. And in fact, you can assign as many different identifiers to that underlying code as you want. So now when documents transfer from one organization to another, you can call it whatever you want in your own internal system, but internally, in terms of how the document is identified between parties, is using that underlying very unique code. Now, I got to admit that when I started Intellog in 2008, I kind of assumed that was done, right? That somebody out there had done that. Well, the fact of the matter is, they hadn't. So that's an opportunity that we jumped into. And this is the one and only time you're going to see the Intellog logo. What we had proposed was that we would generate that list. There are only about somewhere between 500,000 and 750,000 wells in the Western Sedimentary Basin. So it's relatively trivial to generate the list and assign these numbers to it. And then our plan was to simply distribute that to whoever wanted those, including potentially companies that we might compete with in value-generating products. So in the next slide, we kind of jump out of the way and just simply let the industry use those codes in their exchange of documentation. Now here's the exciting part, right? We propose to charge absolutely nothing for that. The idea being that if you charged anything, then you were going to get into a discussion of, well, I already have data from somebody else, I'm not sure I want to spend it again. But if you're given a high quality data set for which there is no charge, right, there's really no excuse not to use it. The equivalent that I draw, or the comparison I draw, is that if the Canadian government had said, we're going to introduce a postal code, but we're going to charge you to use it, nobody would have ever heard of it today. But the mere fact that it was out there, it was available free and of high quality, people embraced it. So that I was very excited about that. And the reaction from industry, one of my favorite Seinfeld episodes was the one where Kramer decides he has better routes for the fire engines to follow. And he goes in there and he talks to the fire captain, he's really excited, and the fire captain's response to that is, Mr. Kramer, just about every week we have somebody coming in here talking about faster routes and snazzier colors for the trucks. Well, Mr. Kramer, frankly, we think things are fine just the way they are. And every conversation I used to have about the proposal of this standard identifier, I was met with some version of that fundamental reaction. Is we just kind of like things the way they are, thank you very much. So let's go through the stakeholders very briefly. Industry, their reaction to some degree was, Mr. Gannon, have you seen how much money we're making already? So any sort of new identifier wasn't really going to help people that much in terms of making more money. So they were kind of lukewarm to the idea. Government kind of had their own process, and they had basically invented the current system, so they weren't really all that excited about using it. Existing IT vendors, they absolutely hated the idea, because basically we were proposing to give away a portion of data that they were currently charging good money to people to get. And there were 2 or 3 competing vendors in that standard. So the fourth stakeholder, and I think this is a very important one, but one that's often overlooked, is the general public. And the general public has an abiding interest in where these wells are and how they're identified, and I'm going to use a very compelling example to illustrate why. Let me introduce you to Kalmar, Alberta. It's odd that the only picture I could find of the Welcome to Kalmar sign had a guy planking on it. But such is life. Kalmar is, I think, about an hour's drive from Edmonton. You'll find it kind of right down there. It's very close to Edmonton. And a couple of years ago, something really interesting happened, interesting and frightening, is that there was a gas leak from some abandoned wells that a subdivision was built right over top of. And in fact, to fix those gas wells, to basically, everybody was taking the attitude, well, we didn't even know they were there, right? They actually had to demolish homes in order to get the service rigs in to fix them. What this arose from was a disconnect between 2 levels of government. The municipal government said, well, we didn't know they were there, right? Well, nobody told us. The ERCB's perspective was, hey, nobody ever asked, right? So through a disconnect between 2 levels of government, unfortunately, the homeowners were forced to demolish their own homes in order to fix a gas leak for a well that they really by right should have known there. We think open access to data would prevent this kind of thing happening in the future. Not with absolute certainty, but there would be a better chance. So Intellog, on that basis, in spite of that subtle opposition to this idea, we went ahead and canvassed each of the governments in the Western provinces, and Manitoba was on board. They would charge us nothing to get access to the identification data. British Columbia was exactly the same. Saskatchewan has been fabulous, a real standout in terms of their support of the idea. Alberta, $66,490, plus $1,099 a month. So our dreams of an open source well list came to a crashing halt. And we entered into a period that I like to call the abyss. I started in December of 2007 with a simple request to the ERCB that they would provide this data for free, not for $66,000, and we would subsequently give it away for free. We would make no money from it. They said no, and of course, and I followed with letters to 2 ministers of energy, the Premier, the Ombudsman, and eventually I wound up in March of 2010 filing a Freedom of Information request in order to get this information. They have their own machinations that they go through, so in May of 2011, there was a call for inquiry, and there's currently a plan to have that process wrapped up by March of 2012. Nearly 4.5 years since I first asked the question. So there are many who say that the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act doesn't really mean that. What it really means is F off, it's private. So let me talk briefly about how we intend to make a buck. One of the things that we've thought about is hiring this guy. We think he's got some creative ideas in terms of raising money. But more realistically, we think we'll follow the advice of this man, which is a guy called Chris Anderson, has a book called Free. And he outlines the various ways by which money can be generated from fundamentally free things. And let me introduce a couple of the players. This is a guy called King Camp Gillette, the inventor of the Gillette razor blade. He gave away the handles, but he charged you for the blades. RYANAIR in Ireland gives away the seats, but you have to fly in a plane that looks like this, like painted in Jaguar livery, which I think looks kind of nice. So Intellog's perspective is that we're going to be able to combine some free stuff with some revenue-based stuff and make a great business out of it. Free will be always, well identification will always be free. We think that basic search will be free, advanced search will be something that you'll pay for. Public tagging will be something that will be available to you for free, but if you want to have a group of wells tagged but maintain some privacy around those, that you would pay for that. That we believe that we would provide some limited upload capability for free, and that we would provide unlimited upload of information for a fee. Small collaborations versus unlimited collaborations, public data versus value-added data, and finally, advertising versus no advertising. The free service would include advertising, the fee-based service would not. And let me just talk briefly. I realize I'm running short on time, but let me just talk quickly about the road ahead. I'm a pathological optimist. And I was delighted to see that the old boys political club in this province no longer consists of old boys. You know, attractive, intelligent, articulate women who I actually canvassed and asked their opinion as to where they were going to take the province with respect to open data. Alison Redford and Danielle Smith both replied to me in writing, and both of them made a firm commitment to opening up the province's data store. So I am optimistic that this is a process that will be much easier in the future and much more supportive of entrepreneurs such as myself and Bruce. So we eagerly anticipate March 2012. We continue to try and survive and make a buck using the tools that are in front of us at our disposal now, and we're optimistic for the future. That's the QR code for my LinkedIn page. If you want to connect and further discuss this matter, I'll be happy to do that, and I'd be happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Have you seen the EcoJustice Lions Watch Canada court case with Environment Canada? It was 10 years, but they actually won access to mine tailings data.
I'm not familiar with that.
I probably don't want to go that route because it's nasty, long, and painful, and et cetera, but do take a look at it. EcoJustice and Mining Watch Canada,
right,
taking Environment Canada to court to get access to the mine tailings data, and they were successful.
Well, it's good and it's encouraging, and I have thought about what will happen if the FOIA process does not fall in our favor. And suing them is something I would consider. I mean, and we're going to add years to the process, unfortunately, to do that. I'm actually quite optimistic. There's some recent correspondence from the FOIA Commissioner's office where they were actually asking the ERCB, why is it that you're charging $66,000? So I'm optimistic in terms of where that's going, but there's no way of telling how that's going to turn out. Any other questions? Right at the back.
What role do you see municipalities playing in this? Because it's largely in Canada, at least been the municipalities that have had the open data catalogs,
yeah,
versus provincial or federal. So just where do you see that fitting in with the business model that you proposed?
Well, a couple of things is that, first of all, open data provides, you know, at whatever level of government provides opportunities for entrepreneurs, including me. So I mean, I would take advantage of any data that's open to build a product that people value and will pay for. I think that the other role of the municipal governments is to set a positive example for how this could be done and how, you know, what the benefits are. I mean, I alluded to it earlier, is that the Saskatchewan government is stellar in terms of its making data available. And I continue to point the other jurisdictions to them and say, can you be more like they are? So I think by setting a good example, as many municipalities are, that's all helpful. As are initiatives that we'll find stateside as well. I mean, you know, data.gov in the States is it's great to be able to point to that as being a very positive example of what's possible. Any other questions? One more?
Yeah, I like the idea of, you know, creating a unique identifier for everything. But even before that, do you think that something like NoSQL databases might be helpful?
We are, in fact, we've just embarked on a new project, and we're actually using NoSQL. We're going to use the schemaless databases.
Yep.
We're going to use MongoDB.
Okay.
Because we do see this as an evolving process, and of course, it sounds like you will know is that if we dedicated one MongoDB document to each well, I mean, MongoDB can do 550,000 wells in its sleep. Right?
Exactly.
That's trivial,
yep.
Right? So, but the idea of being able to flexibly expand the data structure over time is something that we're really excited about. So we've embraced Mongo.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks very much, Terry.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is David McChesney. David is the District Manager for ESRI Canada for the Prairie region. For those of you who don't know, ESRI Canada is probably the leading edge company in the geospatial world, and they have developments that most companies use around the globe. So, David, it's my pleasure to introduce you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really relate to your presentation there, Terence. I used to work for Petrosoft, and we did oil and gas reserves management on a worldwide basis, and yeah, ran into a lot of those things. But I always thought it was free for that data. Anyone could get it, but it just came in such a format that nobody would want to use it.
Well, and probably your employer was paying the bills.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. So, anyways, yeah, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that, and I appreciate being here. In that whole vein of open data, that's kind of what I'd like to talk to you guys about today. And it is about open data and what you can do in the mapping environment with that open data today. Really today you need data for current projects and you need that data to be authoritative. And whether it's for municipal, provincial, national planning, analysis, operations, the maps that you rely on need to be accurate. And as part of our technology solutions here in Canada and around the world, ESRI is providing this program for free to anyone, public or private organizations, to ensure that access to accurate mapping data. So today's session I'm going to cover a little bit about our current website, ArcGIS.com, and you'll see a number of links to that, and I also have some handouts here afterwards, and then really get into why community maps is important, especially in Canada. I'm not sure what that thing is up in the corner here. Oh, that would be the DVD I was watching last night. Which is okay, it's a really good one. It's called The Pyramid Code.
Lucky for you.
Anyways, today, for most, I'm not sure, and I'm not going to assume that everyone knows what our technology is, but we provide technology for mapping, for creation of maps, analysis, and operational maps. Both from a web, mobile, and desktop area. I'm not going to get into that. This is just puts things into perspective. And typically people use these maps for visualizing, compiling, analyzing, collaborating, and communicating that data to others typically within their organizations. And what we've really been messing with here in the last number of years is the ability to provide those in cloud and web services and create both internally and externally enterprise server environments so that that data can be shared. And now we're kind of seeing that kind of expand with the advent of the internet over the last couple of years on this ArcGIS.com site, in that there's two components to it. There's the content, which is the ArcGIS Online stuff, where you can find and share and use and organize maps with other users who are doing the same thing, and build in your own mapping expertise, whether you want to do analysis or operations or whatever. ArcGIS.com is just the website to facilitate that. And what we're seeing is that today it's out there on the internet. Tomorrow you're going to be able to pull a lot of that inside the firewall if you want, utilizing a lot of that same technology. But really it's that external website that is really important right now. And what we're providing for free is kind of a world street map, world imagery map, and world topographic map. And it's the topographic map which is part of this community maps program that I'm going to talk about here in a second. So it really is, ArcGIS Online is a cloud-based GIS. We host it up on Amazon, and whatever data you want to put up there, whether you want to create a public group or a private group of your own, you can certainly do that and store your own data up there for sharing or putting the analysis that you're doing that's relevant to your community out there on the net to be shared. And so what can you do up there? You can basically see what others have done. You can make your own maps, search, and sign in into your own personal account, and basically not have to buy any software at all. Okay, a lot of the data is already there. You'll find that there are currently maps, applications, and mobile apps that have already been designed and developed by other users out there that are freely downloadable. And if you want to include it into your own websites or create your own web services internal to your organizations, you can actually create those web services utilizing a lot of the content that's already been developed by others and not have to reinvent the wheel. That's when I first saw this about 3 years ago at the user conference. I've been with ESRI about a year, and I thought, man, this is pretty cool stuff, because they're just sharing the source code and enabling others around the world to really push mapping technology forward. And the cool thing is that it's kind of like Facebook. You can rate them, you can like them, you can rank them, and basically put in your own comments and sort them by the number of downloads, what's popular, what's not. And basically create a connection to a web service, so that if you're creating your own web services with your own data, and you want to use one of these maps as a base map, as a background for your own map, you can actually call that web service and do mashups that allow you to utilize that data for free. And likewise, it expands to the mobile environment. And it supports all sorts of different APIs, which I'll cover here in a sec. So you can create your own free accounts. You can create your own groups, whether you want them to be public or private. And you can add maps as required. So the community topographic based map, it's template based, it's collaborative, it's multi-scale, but the key part here is that we're getting data from authoritative sources. So we're working with a number of different groups across Canada, municipalities, provinces, private groups, and federal government, to take the data that they consider authoritative, and we're stitching it all together so that from a Canadian standpoint it looks like one big map. And then as you zoom down into a municipality, for example, if you want to zoom into Banff, for example, it goes all the way down to the parcel level with addressing, with the roads, with the topology, as to, am I on the side of a mountain or am I in a flat plain? And it's authoritative. We don't own the data. The municipality owns the data and updates it. So it started back in 2009, and there's kind of the small scale base maps, which is provided by Canada, and then the larger scale ones are provided by the province and the municipalities. what we initially found with the original Canvec data is a lot of the mapping information on the maps was 30 years old, right? It hadn't been updated. The federal government didn't really put a lot of effort into updating it. So what Alec Miller, the owner of ESRI Canada, did is said, hey, I'll take that on. I'll work with you to provide authoritative source and actually host that for the rest of the country. So the country can actually, so you give us the data, we'll cache it, we'll do the QA/QC on it, stitch it together with the municipalities and the provinces, and then provide that back to the municipalities and provinces for free to use as backgrounds for base map, and it's authoritative. And so there is a QA/QC process around that. So it is authoritative. You can consume it whether you're a mapping professional or just a public user. It provides high quality maps, and also there's also the ability to participate in free feedback programs, such that if you want to use consumer, if you want to use citizen feedback forums, you can actually set that up. We'll host it. It'll create a layer of feedback from your constituents to say this building doesn't exist anymore, this road has been closed off, it doesn't exist anymore, and that'll actually be fed back to the regional municipality as part of the program. So really the key driver is to have authoritative source for mapping data across Canada, and so really we are building this new community, because what's happening is they're taking these maps and they're creating their own applications and putting that data back up on ArcGIS.com or in their own internal websites to share with others. So where does all the content come from? Well, like I said, it comes from Canvec data. We're not only doing this in Canada, we're doing it around the world. You can go to cities like Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Toronto, Banff, St. Albert, Toronto, Ontario, Moncton. They all participate in the program, and it'll go down all the way, sometimes down to the tree level in some of these municipalities, because the municipalities and provinces and state organizations, they have all that data. They don't, and they necessarily don't want to maintain it for access to everyone, because that takes cycles. So what they're doing is they're giving the data to ESRI. We take it, create these cache tiles, which is really just a high performance background picture of that map that you can do analysis and routing on, and give it back to those municipalities. So it's hosted. It's hosted by ESRI. It's freely available in those three areas, and really our intent is to curate it, do the QA/QC around it, create a community process that brings data providers together and publish those collective results, and then we'll update it in iterative releases and update it over time. Obviously, it's online, it's high quality, and it's high performance, and there's no costs required for the providers of that data. And then the APIs that we provide here are in all the different formats: REST, JavaScript, Flex, Silverlight, and you can publish them as web services to be consumed either internally or externally. We also give citations on the map itself. It says, provided by City of Banff up on the map when you're zooming in and zooming out. So example, here's Mapatron. It's a little hard to see, but you can see the topology, the pools in the backyard, the parks, the trees, the tree inventories, the data, and at a very high scale, very high resolution. And other communities are mashing it up with public data such as crime statistics, property values, bus routing, snowplow routing, etc. There's a website out there called top100projects.ca, and it utilizes the community maps as the topological layer in the background, and it overlays all of the federal government's top 100 infrastructure programs that they're providing the billions of dollars for across Canada. And you can zoom in, zoom out, and basically click on the, you can actually click on these and sort by province, sort by dollar value, sort by city, etc., and get all that information. So almost done here. And some communities are actually participating in an exchange where you can do replication, and as a building or a new building development goes in, that new building development will actually show up on the map as soon as it's published and accepted by the local municipality, and then put back into the online one. So the published sites today are up here. We should be at about 100 different municipalities and organizations participating in this by the end of the year. We're very, very aggressive in this, as a lot of these organizations are finding real value to having us take the data, almost do QA, QC against it, and then reuse it for their internal purposes. I mean, if this is just really how these organizations do participate in it. I'm not sure if there's any municipalities here, but I can always talk to them afterwards. And yeah, to find out more, please go to our website or contact me afterwards. And I have some brochures up here for more information as to what we do. And I'm very willing to, there's some good web connectivity here, so I can actually show some real examples of the city of Banff here, or the town of Banff, and show you exactly what they provided us. So thank you very much. Any questions? Yes?
The data that you're creating is feeding back to Canvec? Or not feeding back to Canvec? So you take Canvec, but you don't feed back into Canvec?
We provide them the cached tiles back.
Okay.
So yeah, we're relying on the partners to, like, they're the ones who are the authoritative sources for the data. But if we do QA, QC and see it on an image file, because we also have imagery for all of Canada, on that imagery file, if Canvec is providing us data that shows a particular topology of an area, and the imagery shows that there's maybe an airstrip there, we'll actually go back to Canvec and do the comparisons when doing the stitching to say, look, you're missing something on your maps. So we're actually finding quite a few things at different scales as you go in and go out. And comparing this to like Bing Maps and Google Maps, a lot of the data there might be 10 or 5-10 years old, depending on where you are in the country. So we're trying to get an authoritative map from authoritative sources, freely available with no copyright ownership of that data at all.
May I ask a follow-up?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So what you're saying is you will advise them that their map's out of date, but they don't necessarily update it. So you're not doing the real-time updates with them. So.
Yeah, we'll provide it back. If they want to do the replication thing where it goes back and forth, then that's the more iterative process, and it's available to whoever wants to participate in that. Yes?
Well, this sounds like a really great service, but I'm wondering, how does ESRI do this? What's the business model? How is this going to grow business out of
I was talking about that.
this?
Yeah, I was talking about that in the hallway. ESRI is a private company, right? And we don't have a board of directors to report to or anything like that. And it's interesting, the owner of ESRI Canada and the owner of ESRI Galactic down in California, they both have these very grand ideals around just putting the maps in the hands of people and letting them do their work. If they need the real strong tools to manipulate and analyze data, they'll buy them from us. But for the most part, for free access to the real data to do real life things like manage a flood or manage a disaster or manage just what's happening in their own community, you can do that for free using the web services online. And that's what both Jack and Alec want to do. They just want to get it into the hands of everyone, but with real data and some real tools that provide value. So that's kind of, it's it's a very philanthropic sort of thing. But like at our user conferences, there's Jane Goodall and world economists that I would have never been exposed to. Having worked at Microsoft for a number of years and IBM for a number of years, it's a totally different culture, which is just kind of refreshing.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
I was wondering if you see Microsoft Bing's licensing affecting community maps.
Not at all. No, we actually license Bing and make it available to all our users.
Yeah,
So,
but aren't they gonna change their licensing, so you have to get it directly from Microsoft?
I think if you want to use it internally and require login and security around it, you need to get those licenses directly with them. But if you're going to make it a free service, then you could get it directly from ArcGIS.com as a layer and utilize it for free.
Okay.
I'm also available afterwards, so any questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, our last speaker is Hamish Campbell, and Hamish is joining us today virtually from New Zealand. So as we get connected here, making this online here. Hamish has a company, Koordinates. He is working in building a number of web-based mobile applications for using open data, and he has a broad understanding of different types of storage, discovery, distribution of data, and his site Koordinates aims to be the one place for geodata. And Hamish, are you there?
Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so you can see my screen okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, brilliant. So I'll bang through this really quickly. I've got a couple of slides, but it'd be more interesting to show you the technology. Just to summarize Koordinates, we're a New Zealand-based technology startup. We don't really qualify as a startup anymore. We're profitable and we're growing. We launched Koordinates.com in November 2007. We're currently serving over 1,000 public layers. We've got 8,000 users in 100 countries, and we're getting about 200 gigabytes in raw downloads per month through the Koordinates website. So that doesn't include our other portals through our major clients. And a major milestone for us this year was launching the LINZ data service in June 2011. Now, Land Information New Zealand is the Crown entity responsible for maintaining private and Crown property rights in New Zealand. So that includes all their survey and title data, geodetic, topological maps, hydrological, and a whole lot of other data. And Koordinates is now the platform that is providing that data for free to anyone in the world. If you have any questions, please do interrupt. Megan will probably need to pass you the, or someone will have to pass you the microphone there, but I'm happy to take questions anytime, by the way. So why does Koordinates exist? The number one reason is data delivery is really hard. We know because we've been working on it for a number of years now, and when I first started out, it initially seemed quite easy to distribute data around, but you pretty soon realized that with the number of edge cases there are around projections and different competing standards and different philosophies and how different data formats work, it's not surprising that the majority of tools that exist at the moment are focused strongly on cartography and web applications, and far less on actually putting the data directly in the hands of the users. These days, 90% of people are actually power users, to use an old school phrase. Tools like Google Earth have made it so that just about anyone can look and explore data. But these days, you don't know exactly who your target is, and you've got web developers who are extremely technical but don't know the vagaries of the GIS format. They still want access to your data. You've got analysts who want to get data onto their desktop to do some work with. So Koordinates really fills that gap that we feel a lot of products more or less brush under the carpet, of putting the data into the user's hands in the way that they want it, when they want it. So if we have a look at the main Koordinates website, is that visible now?
Yes, it is.
Cool. So this is our main website, Koordinates.com. What we try and do is make it easy to find data, to download the data, and to do it in the way that you want it. So very simply, we've got all of our list of layers here, and we've got the University of Otago as created a deprivation index out of census data, so we can add it to our map, and we can zoom in onto Auckland, so this is where I am now, and we can crop out a piece and we can download that. I can choose if I want that in CAD, I can choose my projection, and we'll only get valid projections for the extent that I'm looking at. We've got our different formats. We can download it as CAD or for Google Earth. But not only that, we'll provide it as an OGC web services. We'll provide it as a developer-friendly API. We can also explore the layer in more detail within the interface as well. So zoom right in. We've got full metadata description, we've got attachments. We've put a lot of work into license management as well. We feel that a lot of tools have not really empowered license management, and it's a real problem when you're looking for data and providing data and using it, actually understanding what the license conditions are. So we've worked pretty closely with Creative Commons as well to provide easy tools for licensing your data. We can actually explore what's in the layer as well in more detail. We've got attribute searching, which might take a little while to load. We can search within layer data as well. We can list what web service is available. We've got a geodata API on this side. And users can add comments as well, and they can actually add comments with drawings as well. So I can draw on a part of the layer. And I can attach a comment to that, and then we'll get notified of that. And that's a really good review process as well. So we sort of came about because we wanted to release a lot of the data that was tied up in councils in particular, but also in research institutions and private organisations, and make it easy to manage that data and deliver it down to end users. If I jump back to my slides very quickly. So your typical use case, if you look at how distribution works at the moment, you have your organisation on the left, which has some business processes, and they use certain software and they have their own standards, and it's all nice and square and well understood, and they can quantize that very accurately. On the right-hand side, they've got a fuzzy cloud of their users, and they don't really know who those users are. You can make some guesses, and you know who your internal users are, but you've got an awful lot of people who either you are not aware that they wanted your data in the first place, or new technologies come about that mean that your data becomes more useful, or there are aggregation services that you could be using. And the problem we've seen is that a lot of organisations like councils or universities will attack the problem of data distribution without looking at their own process, by compromising their own processes and assuming what their users want. So what we try and do is make it as easy as possible to get your data in and as easy as possible to get your data out. And that's all about empowering both the organisation and your users. So rather than worrying about the platform that you're using or the software that you're using or what your user wants to use the data for, we try and act as a universal translation service, I guess would be a good phrase for it. So when you actually want to add data, we can do it a number of ways. So this is just within our free website, so I can go upload. Untitled City Council is one of our major clients, I'm just under their account now, but I can directly upload an archive, so that can be a zip file or a 7-zip or a tar or a number of other archive types that can include as many different types of geodata within the archive as you want. If you have metadata, we'll pick up all the layer information from the metadata automatically, and we'll translate that between ISO standards and Dublin Core all automatically. If you don't have it, that's not a big deal either. And we can also download directly from a URL. So if your data is online somewhere, and you don't want to upload it through your internet connection, you can just put in the URL there, press add data, and come back in a little while, and it will have already input your data, and you can start creating layers from it. Not visible here, but for other clients, we can also replicate ArcGIS server vector layers from a ArcGIS server installation. We can pull down Postgres dumps and other database dumps, and we're working on all sorts of different ways of pulling in data. So the key takeaway message there is that we want it to be, you work how you want to work with your data, we'll work around you to make sure that we can get your data into a universal format that then can be translated back into just about anything else.
Sorry, Hamish, can I just give you one more minute?
Yep. I'll just jump forward a little bit. So really what our clients get out of it and why we've had a bit of success now in New Zealand is that there's been a bit of general frustration about getting data out there. And so a good example is Land Information New Zealand, who contracted us to provide their data portal. And so this is their website here. Essentially the same, but it also will publish to aggregation services, so data.gov.nz. Everything that's within the LIMS data service and coordinates will also appear in the New Zealand government's aggregation service. And we're finding, we've done a fair bit of user surveying, and they found that it's been incredibly useful for a huge range of people, not only consultants and contractors who are getting data directly into their applications, but also interested users. We have surveys using data now. A lot of architects are now using the data that they can get without having to contact local authorities and not really being aware of what data's there. Yeah, so that's where we're going. Just very briefly about our platform. Koordinates.com website is really only one part of it. That's sort of our flagship site that runs on a combination of Amazon services and Rackspace, and we try and move it around so we're not dependent too much on one particular provider. We can also provide a warehouse installation which uses the same software, or the same website rather, but we can create a branded portal. So it uses the same infrastructure, but it gives the client the ability to manage their users, their groups, and their own data, and she'll publish to other coordinates websites as well. So they get access to the complete store of existing data, as well as adding their own. So Lakehead Research, which is a current institute of research in New Zealand, is one of our customers there. And then the enterprise version, which is a standalone multi-server version, that's what powers the LIMS data service. That runs on a local server farm and basically lets them have high availability, extremely good reliability and performance, and serve data locally as well. So that's a very, very quick overview of what we do and why we do it, and I'd love to hear your questions.
Thanks very much, Hamish. Really appreciate it. And I'll just open the floor up to any questions that people might have. And if necessary, I'll relay the question to you if you can't hear it.
No problem.
Okay. Okay.
I might have missed this, but is there a free version and then a subscription version? Is that how it works?
Yes, sorry. So Koordinates.com, you can use it completely free. You can go on and register an account. You can upload data. The data can be as big as you want, and it will be completely free both for you and your users. The only exception is that orthophotography is particularly CPU intensive for us to serve, because we've got to predict, if the user wants to project it and download it, then it becomes a little bit prohibitive for us. So there's a nominal cost there, but it's very low. It's only to cover our own processing costs. So Koordinates.com for public users and then open data, and we've sourced a lot of open data ourselves and through various individuals, is completely free.
Question?
Could you share with us just one or two things that you think have really contributed to your success?
I think building personal relationships with councils and the organisations that we've been, the problems that we're trying to solve for these particular organisations, we've really talked to them directly and understood exactly what the frustrations are and then attempted to solve them. So I feel like some of the tools that exist out there are sort of all-in-one platforms. They have that problem of trying to solve a problem that they don't yet understand, and we've taken a problem that we do understand and targeted it, and we feel that we've done a really good job in solving it. I think that's probably the key success at the moment.
Hamish, I was very impressed that you brought up the deprivation index, because it's something that you never see kind of infrastructure data GIS geeks talk about, so I was very excited about that. I have a question for you in terms of people who are involved in the social sector and in the social policy sector. Have you heard from them or any feedback from them on actually using the deprivation index in their communities?
It's interesting. New Zealand, we're in a good place at the moment. That there is a strong movement towards opening up government data. In particular, the government has made a directive to all departments that taxpayers are going to pay for the collection of this data. By rights, it should be provided back to the public for free. Likewise, for example, the deprivation index there, it's sourced from New Zealand census data, which is available, but this is published by the University of Otago. And so people are quite open about sharing information. We specifically are not involved too much in that production side of it. We advocate the release of the data, and we've been active sort of behind the scenes a little bit to push to get the stuff out there. I guess that's where we stand, is that we want that data out there so that people are aware of it as well. There's a lot of stuff, good stuff like this that's done that just never sees the light of day because it is difficult to distribute. And by making it easy to publish and easy to find, that's where we sort of feel like we're filling the gap.
Any other questions? Hamish, it's Bruce here. A question on the potential for perhaps government to take advantage of the open source movement as a means to download responsibilities for upgrading data onto the private sector. Any comments on that?
Sorry, can you just repeat that quickly?
Just the potential for governments to potentially download some of their responsibilities for data to the open source arena as a means of updating their data and maintaining it. Any potential for that in your mind?
Yeah, we think so. One of our selling points is that the ability to make that data available easily and to comment on it. And we're starting to see people sort of commenting on it and giving some feedback to assist that crowdsourcing process. I guess New Zealand, we're a bit small, and oftentimes it comes down to a small group of motivated individuals who might be a little more technical rather than a large group of less technical sort of casual users. But that said, it's been really interesting working with LINS in particular, where they are very strong on open source, and they've spent a lot of time developing their own tools, and they've contributed commits to various projects like Postgres, and built their own tools that they've open sourced as well around analysing the data. So that's been really interesting as well. Ourselves, we use a lot of open source tools under the hood. The LINS data website uses open layers, and we use GeoServer, and everything's running on Python and Django and various other open source modules. So we've contributed a lot of stuff back into those projects as well. It seems to be a common thing that a lot of open source projects get 95% of the way there and don't get that extra 5% to finish them off. And in some cases, I think we've provided that extra 5% so that we can really use it in production in anger.
That's great. All right. Well, thanks very much, Hamish. And if you can just hang on there, we're just going to, I'll invite Alex Joseph who's the Executive Director of the Water and Environmental Hub, the WEHUB, who's sponsoring this particular session up. And we're going to virtually give you a gift. And, I hope you enjoy it. But we'll get it to you one way or the other. It may take a while for it to arrive. But,
thank you very much.